You've seen it, I've seen it, we've all seen it. The criticism of One Piece where someone says, Luffy doesn't grow as a character, you can't have a good story where the main character doesn't grow and change. And my goal today is to once and for all debunk that criticism with my own criticism of their criticism. And it's not really something I've heard people talking about. In fact, it's kind of bizarre to me how people latch onto the wrong mindset when making counter arguments to this claim. It seems to me that One Piece fans are kind of shooting themselves in their collective feet when defending One Piece. What I mean is I always see fans retort with, but Luffy does grow, which is kind of true, but it's a really watered down argument. Yes, Luffy does have moments of character growth throughout the series. In fact, his growth is kind of astounding when you don't look at the individual moments, but look back on the series as a whole. Luffy really comes into his own as a leader. Compare that to the beginning of the series, where his crew was just a loose collective of friends, with some of them jumping ship the moment they saw a convenient out. Luffy tends to have to chase after his crew and make sure they're alright a lot of the time. Of course, Luffy's trust is still there, and we still occasionally get someone jumping ship nowadays, but the tone is decidedly different. It's clear how cohesively the crew works together as a crew in the latter half of the series, but more of a friend group in the former. This is a clear example of Luffy's leadership coming into prominence, which he really did have to grow into. And moment to moment, you will find some scenes of actual character growth from Luffy as well. The scene where he learns from Vivi the value of humbling yourself in a dire situation. He learns his reckless assumptions of strength can actively cause harm, and he learns that skeletons can poop. All of these are much clearer instances of Luffy learning and growing on screen, much like your typical growing up shonen protagonist. But that's actually the problem. Luffy's growth in this way is the exception, not the rule. Luffy learning a lesson and growing is overshadowed dozens of times over by events where he succeeds by being exactly who he is now. So what actually makes that work? Well, character arcs typically come in two different flavors, chocolate and raspberry, otherwise known as the dynamic character arc, where the character learns lessons and grows as a result of the story, and the static or flat character arc, where the character remains fundamentally the same type of person they were from the beginning of the story. One seems inherently more interesting than the other, doesn't it? For example, a character often associated with a static arc is Superman. He's built to be perfect in every way, and you can't really grow from that. You could get worse, and a corruption arc isn't out of the question, but that usually isn't the case for Superman. So what you have is a character who stays the same no matter what the story is and never grows. As a result of this though, most people say that Superman is boring, but I think a lot of comic book fans would probably disagree with you. The problem is that Superman throughout his time as a pop culture figure has been continuously misused. The public's perception of a hero is usually based on the latest blockbuster iteration of them, and Superman hasn't been doing well in that regard, pretty much ever. The filmmakers know that a character growing and changing is a good way to get viewers attached, and so they make the perfect character try to grow, inviting failure. But what's the alternative though? Having Superman just beat up bad people while being perfect for 2.5 hours? Well, no. A character with a static arc just needs to be used differently. In my mind, a story always represents some sort of change. If the status quo is maintained, the story would be pointless. Unless the story is actively trying to be subversive by doing that, it'll be super boring. So that leads us to the thesis statement of this video. Are you ready for it? If the main character doesn't change, something else has to change. That's it. The main character can be as perfect and unchanging as they want as long as the world around them changes. Whether that be other characters or even the society at large. And this is exactly what Luffy's so good at doing. Let's go through possibly my favorite One Piece arc with this lens, Arlong Park. Luffy, from the beginning of this arc, is fully capable of taking down Arlong, and he doesn't have a stake in the dynamics of Nami's growth as a character, which is why he literally goes for a walk when he could learn her story. Luffy instead is treated more as a device to compare against Nami as she grows. Every time they interact throughout the arc, you see Nami's shifting perspective. You can tell she's changing very clearly because every time they talk, Luffy is the same as he's always been. So when Nami confronts the perfect pirate at first, she tells him to go away, that she's capable of handling everything herself. And that part of her is what she needs to resolve within this arc. Then she changes. She becomes more and more unconvinced that she doesn't need help from the perfect pirate. And then she reaches her final point of growth, turning to the perfect pirate and asking for help. No, get it away. Get it away. So no, Luffy doesn't grow in this arc, but he's written perfectly, because the story relied on him being a constant. This kind of situation is presented pretty much in every One Piece story and at vastly different scales, but the logic is always consistent, and therefore, Luffy not growing becomes a core part of why One Piece's story is so compelling to its fans. And this is actually the arc of every Straw Hat after they're recruited. They are dynamic characters when they're first introduced, learning and growing enough to become part of the crew, but from that point on, the story requires them to be the catalyst of change for the world around them as well. So they all stay as perfect as they need to be. Sure, they may have individual quirks like Zoro getting lost all the time, but that's clearly not the growth that his character needs as part of the story. So narratively speaking, we can't consider that a flaw. As a character within this world, he is considered pretty much perfect. In fact, he's so perfect that despite everyone's opinions, he doesn't need another backstory about his character growth, which is apparently enough of a hot take that I felt the need to make a whole video out of it, so check it out. Oh, and Zoro fans, I complain about Sanji a lot in there too, so you might like it as well.